Everyone knows you can swap an LS1 into a car for $500, and today we're going to do just that. No, we're not. I have done LS swaps before for actually less than $500. So today we're actually going to do an LS swap the wrong way. See, where everybody goes wrong is you start with these 5.3s out of the trucks, when you should be starting with a 4th gen F body. When you start with a 4th gen F body, you get the right oil pan, the right accessories, the right intake, it clears, everything's great. When you start with these truck engines, you're gonna have to buy new oil pan, new accessories, new intake, and it just makes things worse. So today, we're gonna do a $500 LS swap the absolute wrong way, just to see what happens. So let's take a look at what we got here. This is a beautiful 2005 Suburban. It is a 2-wheel drive model, so we actually have the right transmission for a rear-wheel drive car. It does have a slight bit of damage that's kind of imperceptible unless you look really close. But the good news is, under the hood, the engine is still intact. We can get that open here. Good old 5.3 Vortec LS. Problem we're gonna have already, this alternator sits up so high it's gonna hit whatever we put it in. Down underneath, that oil pan hangs down too low that when you put it in a car, it's gonna drop below the cross member if it even fits, and it's also gonna get destroyed on the first speed bump you hit. So let's look and see what else we got in this beautiful machine here. Nearly spotless interior. I think the seals leak just a little bit, but for our needs it'll work. Got a really nice back door. Should lock that. Somebody might break into it otherwise. Some goodies. AAA. I wonder if they'll cover the damage. Yeah, looks like some jumper cables, battery terminal, clean that up. What else we got? Oh, comes with a free cup holder. Oh, here we go. This makes it worth the price of admission. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to use that. That makes it right there. Pretty sure this was supposed to be returned by the last owner. Along with the coaxial. Little air pump maybe. Ooh. Little air pump might be good. Roof's still solid. Look at that, back glass is not even got a chip in it. It's like new. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna part out the parts that we still can of this vehicle for some money to offset the cost. We're gonna sell the powertrain out of the other vehicle to offset the cost. And then we're going to see what our costs ends up being when all is said and done. I know it's going to be more than $500 because, again, this is not the right way to do an LS swap, but this is what everybody thinks they would do when you do an LS swap. Again, don't do this. Go buy a Rec 4th Gen. Yeah, I have to get that down low. I don't know that we can even reuse these accessories. The problem is 4th gen accessories don't quite stick out as far as this, so you can't use the 4th gen water pump without spacers. The truck water pump, the hose points up right there. which might be a problem when you put it in a car. Let's see if we can connect the battery here. Should get a wrench. There we go, just finger tight. Oh, there we go. All right, let's start this beauty up. We got enough power here. Oh yeah. Look at that. She starts right up good too. Needs an oil change. I'll just go ahead and... Seems to idle all right. Got decent oil pressure. It's an LS, so it's just about broke in. I'm sure the cam bearings are fine. Yeah. I want to be comfortable when I'm in here. Oh yeah, the AC still works, so we are good there too. Working AC. All right, let's take it for a little spin. Just a quick down the road. Whew. Oh, make sure she shifts through all the gears. I can't really see out here. That's better. She got a squeak on that side. All right, let's just run her through some gears here. That's a shift. That's a shift. That's a shift. So we got some forward gears. We got an engine. We got a transmission. Running and driving. We're gonna try to sell some of the front body panels off of it. Recoup some of it for money, and then we'll just sell the rest of it for scrap when we pull the engine. So we will probably almost make some of our money back just doing that. So another big question, what did I pay for this gem of a ride? Well, it took some negotiating because, I mean, that back window's not even cracked, so couldn't really talk him down on that, but all in all, $700 is our starting price. That's what I paid for this thing. That is our starting figure. We will go from there, start adding and subtracting depending on if we spend money on it or sell things off of it or off the car we're going to swap it into. Just one more time. Oh yeah. She's a hot ripper. Woo! A little hard to see out the windshield though. You're a sharp person. Wonder if auto glass covers this. All right, we're back with the wrong way to do a $500 LS swap. So the first thing we want to do before we pull the engine, do anything else, give the old HP tuners treatment, turn off the VATs, turn off some other codes. But I did see a check engine light come on, so we want to see if we connect to it and just see what that check engine light says. So I'm going to try to connect to the vehicle. It says the interface has power, but it's not getting power through the OBD2 port. Now, this bottom right pin on the OBD2 port should always have 12 volts no matter what. I happen to know that runs through the cigarette lighter over here, and that runs through this fuse out here. So I think what's going on, this fuse is blown, So we're going to pull that fuse, and then we need to grab another fuse long enough and hope it doesn't blow. We can pull the tune. And this one's for the trailer parking. I don't think we're going to park a trailer with it right now. So if we're lucky, it's not going to blow instantly. Swap that back. Let's see if we get 12 volts. We try to connect to the vehicle this time. Helps if we turn the key forward too. Gathering vehicle information, unable to detect. Okay, that's a different error. Probably because I didn't have the key where it needed to be. Try it one more time. There we go. Requesting. Now it's talking to the engine. That's what we need. So, trouble codes. Read trouble codes. That's just an evap trouble code. That is nothing really serious, so who really cares? So the next thing we're going to do is pull the whole ECU from the engine and rewrite it. Alright, now that we got ECU power to the OBD2 port, let's hope it holds up long enough to read the entire ECU. And then we can do just a minor bit of tuning on it. Like I said, basically we want to turn off the VATs, maybe a few other codes before we pull the engine. So if you remember earlier, I said I paid $700 so far for this whole vehicle. 2 credits to HTP tuners is $100. So now total is up to $800. We haven't sold anything yet. So right now we're still well over the $500 LS swap budget at $800, which by the time we get done, I'm sure we're going to be well above $500, because again, this is the wrong way to do an LS swap. But it's what everybody does, so we're going to, for once, be like everybody else, even though I've done this 3 times the correct way and actually made money off the swaps after I sold the stock powertrain to people that just loved the fact that it was numbers matching and they had to have the magnesium valve covers and all the other great stuff that doesn't make any horsepower, like the crossfire injection, which apparently is worth $175 to somebody for some reason. This time around, we have a stock tune port, most likely, that we're going to sell. I don't know. We'll see what we put it in. We might just do some mods and keep it in this truck for a while just to see if we can get it ready for a car without actually pulling the engine, and that way we can still start it every time and after we do a mod. So, alright, it's reading the ECU. I'm going to let it get done reading that and do some changes. Alright, so we did a couple things here. We turned off some trouble codes. One thing I like to do, I turned down the shift times. The computer probably can't do that with the stock valve body, but it'll try to shift a little quicker. With the torque converter, I hate how the factory GM torque converter is set to slip. So I set the maximum and the minimum to 99 and 100. That way the torque converter is either locked up or it's not. It's not trying to do this cushy slipping stuff where it slips the torque converter clutch. I did leave the torque management for now. We're going to see how the quicker shift times do. Main thing I want to do though before I pull it is this VATS right here, Vehicle Anti-Theft Security. Turn that to none. That way when you do the swap, put it in another car, you don't have to worry about the VATS, and the thing will actually crank and start hopefully. Made a few other minor changes, but again, nothing huge for right now. Just want to see if I can flash this. Right vehicle, right calibration, requesting access. Let's hope it works. And let's hope it writes. And then we'll take it for another spirited test drive just to make sure everything still shifts right and see if it actually shifts a little firmer. But while everything's hooked up, I wanted to make those changes. I do love the fact the AC still works, although the radio leaves something to be desired. Rear view mirror also acts as a side view mirror. Maybe I can make that my new side view mirror. Alright. Right, complete. Close. Don't even really need this trailer fuse, but we'll throw it in there just because. Need to do something with it. Don't want to lose that fancy fuse panel. Put that back on. And first latch ought to do it. All right. Look at that. Not even so much as a check engine light. Not even an airbag light, ABS light, nothing. This thing's minty fresh. I don't think the person that sold this knew what they actually had. Sell it so cheap. Woo! I'll be sure and look both ways. Looks clear that way. Second gear. Third gear. Running out of road gear. Not sure about the careening ability of this thing anymore, the structural integrity. Let's get her to a little bit of a straighter stretch. Oh yeah, let's see, 5 grand, 55, ooh, she shifts, she runs, she goes. Who would have thought a 277,000 mile 4L60 would still be surviving? I would not have guessed that. Oh, there's somebody there. Hey buddy, we're just turning around, don't worry. Yeah. See behind me here. It's probably fine. Give her a little rip again. Shifts. Alright. A little bit of wind noise. It's probably to be expected with leaky seals. Alright. Well, we're going to get it back home and move on to the next step. Instead of just ripping out the 5.3, I think we're going to try to do a few mods that we need to do anyway, but do them with the engine in the vehicle. That way we can see that it still runs and the vehicle's still mobile. So the first thing you got to do to put the LS or 5.3 in any car is get rid of this factory truck oil pan. This truck oil pan is way too deep, and if you put it in most cars, it's going to come down below the K-member, and for a speed bump you hit, it's going to rip the pan off. That's even clears the K-member, because right in here it's probably going to get tight. So if you buy a truck engine, first thing you have to do is swap the oil pan. Luckily, we got this oil pan off Facebook Marketplace. And it looks like, from this chassis number, it's an OEM F-body 4th gen oil pan. This came for 70 bucks. So what we're gonna do, looks like these 2 bolts here and those 2 bolts there, we can actually unbolt the cross member, which is convenient because I would have just cut it otherwise. Take it down, swap out this truck oil pan, put the F-body oil pan, the F-body pickup tube, and maybe the windage tray in its place, bolt that back up, hopefully start the vehicle and see if it still runs, everything clears, and we still have a running vehicle with the correct oil pan on it before we pull the engine. So I'm going to do that first. Alright, so we got the oil pan off. You can see that this hangs down a lot lower than a factory F-body pan pickup does. We're going to take these windage trays nuts off next, but check the oil here. Luckily it's not glittery, because had it been glittery, this would have been a whole stopping point, but it doesn't look like it's got any glitter in it, so hopefully the bottom end's good. You can see if you set one right next to the other, the height difference between an F-body oil pan and a truck oil pan. That's why you got to switch them out, otherwise it's going to drag and be way too low in the car. So we're going to clean this stuff up. We're going to take that windage pan down. We're going to lay out and see what we got. So we got the windage tray off. Still looks like there's 8 pistons right where GM left them. From the lobes on the cam I can see they look alright. And from the pistons that I can see, the bores look smooth still. So luckily these gaskets are interchangeable. So for right now we're just going to throw this back on here to start it with that one. You can see again how much ground clearance we're going to pick up by going to the LS pan. This top tube is the truck pickup. I know sometimes people modify those to try to get them to fit, but since we have an actual LS one, it's already shorter, we're going to go ahead and install that. Same with the windage tray here. The F-body one is a lot shorter, so we're going to go ahead and put that on there too. Sometimes people cut the truck ones and reuse them. That's also an option. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on there. Alright, we got the new oil pan on. Has a little drip in the back. Are we going to worry about it right now? No. Do we torque it to spec? Absolutely not. We torqued it to number 1 on the old DeWalt. But when we take it out, we'll redo it and torque it correctly. Right now I just wanted to make sure that it still runs, doesn't start knocking. The pickup tube's got oil pressure and everything, so I call that a success. And we picked up a lot more ground clearance because this oil pan is flush with the transmission housing as opposed to hanging down another 5 inches. So we've done a little more work on the Suburban. Mainly we've disconnected the drive shaft. We've disconnected the exhaust. We've removed the cross member from the transmission. And we've completely removed the exhaust so we could drop the transmission down a little lower and get to some of the bolts that are higher up in there. You can see over here on the floor we got the exhaust, got the cross members out. This transmission is 2-wheel drive, so it would work, and as we saw driving down the road in an earlier video, it does shift just fine. I do have this other transmission. It's also a 4L60 sitting over here. It's been sitting in my basement for probably 10 years. I've never tested it. I'm almost tempted to throw it in there just to see if it works, but either way, we have a transmission. Possibly 2. Just wish I knew which one was the better one. The only difference in this one, it does have a different tail housing on it. It does have this for a torque arm for an F-body, but to put that on the other transmission, all you'd have to do is unbolt these bolts, bolt it onto the other one. Since the other one's 2-wheel drive, the output shaft's already the right length. Had the other one been a 4-wheel drive transmission, this would not have bolted on because the transfer case would have been bolted on here. The output shaft would have been the wrong length. You'd have had to take this whole entire transmission apart to get down to what you needed to make this work with a two-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive vehicle. So luckily we have two rear-wheel drive transmissions to choose from, one of which we know works and one may or may not work. So now all we gotta do, get to the more fun bolts up there, put the transmission on a transmission jack that I brought over, and pull it out of the vehicle. Amazingly, and I don't know if these are going to fit in between the frame rails, none of these studs broke when I took the bolts out. But I don't know, being truck manifolds, what we're going to maybe put this in, if it flares out too much right here, that it'll work or not. So we may end up having to buy either different manifolds or some cheap headers, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So for now, I'm just going to pull out the transmission and go from there. Alright, so one thing we want to work is the transmission. Now granted, GM blessed us with a 4L60, so if it doesn't work, you might just assume that's a normal GM transmission. If you got a fuse block like this, all I did, I flip it up. I'm going to prop it open here. It's a piece of wood. Alright. So, from the back, you go over here to E, and then go down to 7, which is the second pair right here. That's your rear O2s, and if you remember before, HP tuners got rid of that, but it's still a power wire. So then if you go over here to this one, C9, and if you count down 9, remember there's 2 over here, so you get down to 9 right here. This needs power for your transmission solenoids to work. So right now, I cut it. So just to test it, I'm going to start the vehicle on the lift. And I'm most likely only going to have third gear if I cut the right wire. And then we're going to fix that here in a second. So let me jump in this fine automobile. Alright, so I'm going to start it up. Check engine light's already on. The RPMs go up, but it doesn't shift. So it's essentially locked in third gear. So we're gonna get back out, we're gonna connect those 2 wires, and then we should have our transmission solenoids again. Alright. So the power's coming out here from the O2s, going into here. It's actually coming back out over here for the transmission, so we could have ran it over here, but we'd bypass some fuses and stuff, so safety first and all that. So now, climb back in here, and hopefully I have multiple gears. Hopefully I don't have a check engine light either, so let's start it up. I do have a check engine light, I'll have to check that. It is shifting though. You see, the RPMs are going up. And it is shifting. So one more time. Shift, shift. Now we're at 60 and we're still only at 1500 RPM. So I have to scan that code. But that's working again. One other thing you may have noticed, there's a excessive amount of leg room here. Sold the 2 front seats for $30 each, and I sold the, I don't know what you want to call it, it holds a spare tire though, for $10. So $70 total. It's about what our oil pan costs, so basically we got a free LS oil pan by selling some parts. We also sold front bumpers, rear bumper, and rear tow hitch. We sold each bumper for $75, and we sold the rear tow hitch for $95. So I'm keeping track of it all. At the end, we'll talk about it, but all right, so we got the new transmission in there. Hasn't been ran in 10 years. So we're just gonna put it to the floor and see what it does. Well, it shifts. Looks like it shifts decently. Alright, I call that a success. So now we just gotta decide which transmission to use, but either way, they both work. Alright, so if you look at this fuse diagram here, most of the stuff on the right side here, you're not gonna use. Airbag, HVAC, rear wiper, radio, cigarette lighter, most of this stuff is gonna completely come out. Really, the only thing we're gonna maybe need is this yellow third wire down. That's your starter wire. Technically, the vehicle we're swapping this into, and a lot of other vehicles have their own starter relay, so we may or may not use this. If we use this, it'll control the fuel pump, which is helpful. It'll prime it for a few seconds before you start the vehicle, and should you get in a wreck, it would shut the fuel pump off. So we might use this starter wire, so we want to keep that. The only other wire we really need is parallel to this transmission wire we just spliced together. This pink thick wire right here. Basically, we're going to take the HEI off like the coil or something, and we're going to splice it into this. And then it's going to be hot, and it's going to power the whole entire fuse block. So really, you only need 3 wires on this whole entire connector. This wire coming off your distributor, or what was your distributor. This wire if you want the starter. And this wire if you want your 4L60 to shift until the 3/4 clutch pack inevitably goes out. Everything else over here, we're going to pull all this out. Some of the stuff over here, we're also going to pull out. Most of the stuff you need is right here, and it's going to be powered. As soon as you give that wire power, it's all going to be powered. So that's the next thing we're going to do. Alright, so the check engine light earlier, we went to scan it. We couldn't scan it because the cigarette lighter fuse was pulled. Put the cigarette fuse lighter back in so the OBD2 port had voltage, and then we started up. It had no check engine light. So the other thing I did, removed a bunch of the fuses here. These are mostly high beams, low beams, fog lamps, really nothing you need here. Trailer park, things like that. On the back side, one thing I did here is I jumped these 2 wires. I don't know if you can see it good. So I can prop it up here. Where's the prop stick? So prop that up. There we go. So F9 and F11, which F9 is this orange wire on top, and F11 is this green wire. Basically, all I did was loop these. What this does is, now I don't have to have that big park reverse, neutral drive, low switch on the side of the transmission. It bypasses all that, tells it that it's always in park or neutral essentially. So if I do choose to use the starter, it's always going to crank. And now I can go down to the transmission. I can follow all that wiring back and take off all that wiring. So okay, so I pulled the transmission wiring all the way back up to the engine bay. I separated off the front driver O2 sensor, the rear transmission speed sensor, and the main plug for the transmission. Then things like the shift indicator, whatever you want to call it, and the rear O2, I basically traced all the way back through this wiring mess. And if they went into the fuse box, cut it at the fuse box, and then later I'll pull the pin. Or if they go down to the PCM, I just left the wires hanging, so I know they're trash wires when it comes to it. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the passenger side O2, because it runs along the frame rail way back there, and you don't need the rear one for sure. Alright, so I took the O2s off the passenger side frame rail, brought them up front, cut the second one we don't need, kept this one. If you run this back, it goes to the MAF sensor and goes to the AC stuff. So that's cleaned up. Over on this side, this one has electric fans. So I disconnected the electric fans, like so. You get down here, there's one ground wire immediately that runs the wrong way, so I cut it. But then there's another ground wire that picks up and runs the right way, so I'll just splice those together. Went all the way back through the loom, all the way back up to the fuse box here. So here's your fan relays. So now if I want to, I can run the fans off the computer. May or may not use that, but it's nice to have. In doing that though, this entire block, all this mess of wires here, all that runs to your headlights on both sides and your airbags and stuff we're not going to use. And that's all tied into the same loom that the fans are tied into. So basically this is junk. This is just going to go. We're not going to use this. And even though this is a rat's nest right now, just to prove it, it will still run without all that stuff hooked up. I get in here. Still runs. Still runs. A little louder because I cut the exhaust off right now. But yeah, that's where we're at. One other little thing, took the evap, cut it down, put some silicone in there because it sticks up so high. I know it won't clear the hood of another vehicle. Still worried about that clearing the hood, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So that's where we're at right now. It looks like a rat's nest. Just gonna keep at it. Okay, today we're gonna take a little side quest. Not because it's necessary, just because it's something I want to do. We're going to replace the cam and the push rods and the springs. So as you can see, I tore down the front cover, pulled the crank off. Anybody that doesn't believe this engine is built by God, I want you to know that he personally hand tightens the crank bolt on every single one of these LS engines. Got the rockers off, took the manifold off on this side. Some people use air, I like to use rope. Shove it in through the spark plug hole, rotate the crank over till it comes in contact and holds the valves up. Crane makes a really good tool here. Screw that down, it compresses the valve springs and you can swap them out pretty easy. And then these new and shiny ones are going in with all the parts associated. So let me get that done and then we'll move on to the cam. To give you a quick idea how this crane tool removes the valve springs, 2 bolts here, screw it into where the factory rocker studs were, and you tighten this 3rd bolt, and it just compresses the spring like that. Pops out the retainer. Don't lose those. Put paper towels or something around the oil holes, otherwise, you know, you could lose one down into the engine. At that point, you just back it off, replace the parts you need, tighten it back down, put your new retainers in, or if you're reusing these, put these back in, release the tension, you go on to the next set. Alright, through the magic of millions of dollars spent on internet editing, 2 of them are done. Gonna see if we can back some of the crank off without loosening the bolt. Go ahead and pull the rope out. Pro tip, make sure you measure the rope and it's the same length coming out as when you put it in there, because over time of doing this with 8 cylinders, you could shear the rope off in there, and then when you go to start it, it's going to have really tight compression until it bends a rod. So, alright, on to the next one. Alright, like a woman shopping at Target, we now have a lot of stuff we don't need. Good news is, shiny new valve springs. So let's move on to the cam. Why? Because this is America and we can. So you need to hold up the lifters so they don't fall down into the engine when you pull the cam out. Most expensive way to do that is to buy a metal tool off the internet that shoves in there and holds the lifters up. Or you can just buy these 5/16 wooden dowel rods that cost like $2. And they do the same thing. So, oh, and the water pump bolts, conveniently, same thread size as the cam, so spin that, make sure all the lifters are up, nothing's making noise, pull the cam out, shove the other cam in. Do yourself a favor, don't look at the cam bearings. If you don't look at them, they're fine. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna shove that shaft in that third hole. Alright, I'm not gonna look at them, you look at them. They're fine, right? I'm gonna take your word they're fine. We're gonna just send it. Why? Because if it's lasted this many hundreds of thousands of miles, it's gonna last another 20, 30, 40,000 miles before, let's face it, you're gonna sell the project anyway. So we're just gonna stick the cam in there. Alright, brand new cam in there. We're gonna pull these dowel rods back out. That'll let the stock lifters fall back down. Well, once we put push rods in there and put the rockers on, they'll definitely fall back down, but some of them will slide down slowly, even against the oil and friction. So, there we go. We just got to button everything back up, throw some push rods in it, and then we'll be back to our main journey of a cheap LS swap. And all the reasons that you should start with a 4th Gen F body and not a truck engine. So, this is a special moment, so I just wanted to capture it. This is one of the very few things you'll see me actually tighten to a torque spec other than Ooga Doogas, although I started off on #1 on the DeWalt, which is probably closer than a $12 Harbor Freight torque wrench, but assuming it's accurate, we're going to torque these babies to 22 foot-pounds. Wait for the click. Yep, there we go. Alright, just going to tighten the rest of these to 22 foot-pounds. And then move on to the next thing. Alright, front cover's buttoned up. The crank is back on. There's no water pump on there. That's fine. We got oil in it, I'm pretty sure. So we're just going to start it up and see what happens. Obviously not going to run it that long, but could be catastrophic destruction. Might run fine. But this is truly the first start with the new cam in it. Hopefully I got the battery tight enough. Oh yeah, the gauge is in here. Alright, one more time with the MAF sensor hooked up just to see if it makes any difference, although I was surprised it ran that good with just speed density. All right. Even with the 114 lobe separation, it's got some lobe to it, so hopefully it's good. Now we are off our side quest and back on the main journey. To pull an LS engine out of an SUV, you'd really have to get the cherry picker high, which becomes a top heavy safety issue. Plus I'd have to disconnect the hood, which is like 6-hole bolts and a lot of work. So luckily what these Ford boys don't know is these Chevy vehicles, they're modular, so we can just take it out the front. All right, we've pulled the engine out of the front of the Suburban. We've probably pulled way more wiring than we need, so we want to be careful not to set the engine down and crush the computer or crush the fuse box. We'll clean that up at some point. Go through the engine a little bit. I've taken the motor mounts off because we won't reuse the stock motor mounts. We'll get different ones, but we're going to set that down for a while and then probably pull some other necessary fuel stuff out that we need and keep going.